From Triple Colossal Studios right to your headphones, this is Mike Andreula.
What's happening, guys? It's your man, Michael Andreula, with one of the most fascinating guests we've had so far, Craig Nelson, The Age of Radiance. The book is fantastic. It's about radiation, the whole history of it, from when we discovered it, how we discovered it, up into all of the nuclear disasters, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the government testing that they did with radiation on people, where the term bikini came from, how many nuclear bombs we actually dropped, how bad is Fukushima. That's a topic people are like, oh, Fukushima, it's over. And if you listen to my father's podcast, he's told me that. Well, guess what? It's not even nearly as bad as Chernobyl. Not to say that it's good, but you gotta listen to this thing, set some time. If possible, watch the video, because we'll have some pop-up imagery and videos that can give you a better taste of this. But get the book, Age of Radiance, Craig Nelson. Fascinating. Kept me turning the page continuously, and I'm not a reader. I like to read with my ears. So let's get into it, guys. Enjoy this one because it was rocking. I have so many questions for you, but I really want to know why you chose radiation.
Well, I was looking for a really huge topic because I had done a book about going to the moon called Rocket Man, and it was a bestseller and people really loved it. And it was a combination of wild stories and fantastic things about people you thought you knew but didn't, and this huge turning point in American history. There was the intersection of government and science and politics and the military, and I really wanted to find something else like that, and I came across this idea, and I just thought it was fantastic because even though, you know, there's hundreds of billions of pages published on this, it's all done separately. So you can get a book about, you know, nuclear power, and you can get a book about the Atoms for Peace era, and you can get a book about popular culture and nuclear, but no one has tried pulling it all together before.
No, I think this should be mandatory reading. It wouldn't even need to be mandatory in the school system, because if kids understood that it just seems like radiation, nuclear, you hear these terms thrown around, but you really don't understand what that means.
Well, I thought I was a well-educated person about this topic, and I didn't know. I started working on this, and I thought I didn't know a thing. You know, I thought radiation was immediately poisonous and dangerous. You know, I thought it was very rare. I thought you had to go to, you know, utility plants or nuclear weapon storage places to find it. I thought one contact with it and you got cancer. And so I was just flabbergasted to find that it's raining down at us from the skies and rising up from the bedrock, and it's all over the place. It's in your pets, and it's in your family, it's in you, and every time we get together, we irradiate each other, which I think is a fantastic thing to realize.
Yeah, I really wanted to delve into how many things radiation is in, and it's part of life.
It really is. It's the very last thing that when a star explodes and produces the periodic table of the elements, it produces these fat atoms of uranium and plutonium and thorium and these other items that are too fat for their own good. So, and that's all that radiation is. It's morbidly obese atoms that spit out little pieces of themselves, either two kinds of subatomic particles or a form of energy called a gamma ray, which is like an X-ray. And so I like to say they're like Hollywood starlets. They're unstable and bulimic.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that. I'm happy about the book, actually, because I always listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he discussed how he wants a scientifically literate population, and I think this brings it a long way. I don't know if that was your intention.
Thanks. I sure hope so.
But I feel like that was the case. I'm also fascinated with a lot of horrified and fascinated with different sections of the story. So, and you see these in marketing trends all the time, but when they first discover, they start working with radiation, they decide to put it into waters and beers and health spas. Could you elaborate more on how extensive it was?
over and over again when Röntgen discovered X-rays, and then when Marie Curie discovered radium, and then when the revelations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were revealed to the public, and people first heard about Los Alamos, the exact same thing happened, where everybody turned it into a craze, and they put X-rays, radium, and then atomic into everything.
Yeah.
So, you can get a wonderful atomic energy kit for your child to play with, filled with radioactive elements.
Yeah.
And then there's fantastic salt and pepper shakers of the 2 bombs dropped, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. You could decorate your dining room table with those bombs. And it just shows you how dramatically things have changed, that people used to want to buy X-ray toothpaste and radium-infused water.
Just these things get thrown out. One quick question: was a radiant a term that was in the lexicon before this discovery? Do you know anything about how we came up with that word?
Yeah, it's any kind of emanation, and it almost always has to do with a form of light or energy.
Okay. The other horrifying stories that you go into are how even the U.S. government tested radiation exposure on the population.
Well, they ran around doing all these radiation experiments all over the place. And there's a woman whose name I forgot off the top of my head, talking to you right now, who wrote a fantastic book, and I think she won the Pulitzer Prize for it, exposing all of this. It's a fantastic achievement.
I just couldn't imagine. They made the decision, put it in children's cereal, give it to pregnant women, just mentally insane people, just to see what would happen. Pretty horrifying, but you really tell the story is true, so people should know.
It's quite a shocking moment in American history.
The worst nuclear disaster would be considered Fukushima, most people would think. However, is that the case?
Not at all. By far the worst one is Chernobyl.
Okay.
As far as we know, unless the utility and the Japanese government have covered it up, and they may have, it's possible, no one died at Fukushima. Over 18,000 died in the tsunami and earthquake, but nobody died because of the explosion at Fukushima, whereas the UN thinks that 175 have died because of Chernobyl. Now, Chernobyl is a very weird story because in almost every nuclear utility facility, there's something called a containment dome, which if your core melts down and explodes, it keeps it from infecting the neighbors, this containment dome. But Chernobyl was a period of Soviet design where they were using the same plants to make electricity for citizens and nuclear fissile material for bombs. So they had to change what was going on inside the core, and they just had this little concrete roof over it. They didn't have any containment dome. So when the Chernobyl was running a little safety experiment that went horribly wrong, and it blew up, and then various other parts of it blew up, and it had an atomic fire, a nuclear reactor running out of control for 2 weeks that they couldn't put out. And it set a cloud of fallout the size of 400 Hiroshimas over all of Europe.
And the audience already knows this. My wife is Ukrainian, and you tell the story of the old Ukrainian woman selling apples, Chernobyl apples, and somebody says, maybe you shouldn't advertise that. Well, she says, maybe you want to get it for your mother-in-law or your boss. Just
exactly. So there's a lot of fantastic reporting done in Ukraine and Belarus over what happened afterward that is fairly recent. It's only about a couple of years old. I mean, one of the things that was really surprising to me was all of these events that had taken place so long ago, we're always getting new stuff about them. I was really surprised. So a lot of the great stuff about Chernobyl, especially the people who refused to leave and who snuck back in and what happened to them, is just fantastic.
I really, the book read so well. At that section of the book, I was just flipping page, and you get a real sense of how tough and heroic the individuals, when these disasters happened, a lot of people basically gave themselves up in Japan and in Russia.
Absolutely, and in Ukraine, the major people who died were firefighters. A couple of the deaths were employees of the utility, but a great many of the firefighters trying to put it out got too contaminated with radiation and that they couldn't be helped, and they died. And that were a lot of the deaths were that. And then the wild story that I found out was at Fukushima was that a lot of the heroic people going into the most radioactive part of the plant to try and fix things were derided as being dirty gamma sponges. And a lot of them were members of the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, who had run out of other things to do for employment and ended up working in nuclear.
It's shocking. And I was reading a recent article on some of the workers, they haven't sued the power plant company yet. And they're just starting lawsuits, and the lawsuits are for like $100,000, and the amount of damage their body probably took. I was surprised they didn't get compensated.
Well, a lot of that is because the laws there are very different from here. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was really shocking to me was they don't really have much of a press that is critical of business or government in Japan. And I thought, most democracies had something like that, but they don't. So you don't really find out. It's very difficult to find out information about the most fundamental things when you do research on these topics, because the government and industry are able to keep it out of the press, and they're able to, for example, a lot of the people in the Fukushima chapter were not employees of TEPCO, the utility that ran Fukushima. They were independent contractors because the employees had signed non-disclosure agreements, and they weren't allowed to talk.
And you said we could have averted that whole disaster if the batteries weren't stored in the basement. Is that correct?
Well, it's hindsight is 20/20 with this. So there's all these people who have come forward and shown how they warned the company that this was a terrible idea, building a nuclear reactor in an earthquake zone right next to where tsunamis have been and all this kind of stuff. But actually, you could say that about almost anything. So I don't really know that the company was so at fault in doing that. But it was sad that the only thing that kept them from the only thing that actually caused this to happen was because they kept their batteries in the basement.
So I got so many questions. Do you, bringing it back to Chernobyl, switching gears a little bit, and you go into it in the story and describe it, but when that core starts to melt down, it becomes basically like turning things into lava. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, the way to understand what happens in a nuclear power plant accident is that everyone's worried about fallout, and they think this giant, horrible cloud is going to appear and contaminate them. And that isn't really the problem. The real problem is that the core, the radioactive engine, starts running amok, and it will melt through the floor. And so it turns into this lava-like super hot thing. And if that enters your water supply, then you end up having to abandon territory, which they did in Chernobyl, and I'm sure they're going to do in Fukushima.
And their solution was to pump liquid nitrogen into the floor?
Yeah, they're trying to build an ice wall that will freeze an area around the plant so that water can't get in and out and cause further problems. But I don't know that that's working either.
That's just absolutely fascinating. You try to envision what happens, but I guess it just keeps on bouncing until it runs out of steam. Is that oversimplifying it? But
no, that's about right. If you think of a chain reaction as being like a pool table trick, where you hit a ball into the middle of a pool table, it knocks all the balls into each other, and that causes them all to go into the pocket. That's sort of what a chain reaction is. What you're doing is you're getting radioactive neutrons inside radioactive atoms to bounce against each other and break each other off these morbidly obese atoms. And the chain reaction is that a whole bunch of them are bouncing against each other and breaking each other off, and then those 2 do it, and then those 4 do it, and then those 8 do it. So it's exponential, and the chain reaction is what keeps it going after you stopped applying your own force to make it happen originally. So in this case, the chain reaction of the radioactive materials it's called an atomic fire, and it just keeps running and running and running, and it's almost impossible to put out.
Wow. We have successfully had nuclear power on a lot of, you look at these massive ships, and they just run forever, and they're not burning diesel fuel. Would you, after writing this book, doing all this research, and I believe I know your position, but people out there, what's your stance on nuclear power? Can we continue to use it safely?
Well, in fact, all of the nuclear plants in America are based on the design of the submarine, the nuclear submarine that Hiram Rickover pioneered as the Nautilus. He named it after 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And it is tremendously safe. In fact, the sort of sad story of 3 Mile Island back in Pennsylvania is that containment dome worked, and no one at 3 Mile Island was contaminated by any radioactivity, even though they did indeed have a terrible accident. But at the same time that happened, the movie China Syndrome was in theaters. So instead of hearing that everything was safe, what people generally heard was it's going to melt all the way through the floor to China and contaminate all of Pennsylvania. And so that became the sort of story of nuclear power in America. But I personally feel that, when you look at the deaths that are caused by pollution and industry with petroleum products or carbon-based products, if you're a Star Trek fan, for human health in general, nuclear power is better, but it's very expensive, and it has all these bad histories, and it has a history of utilities and governments doing a poor job of explaining what's going on when things go wrong, that I think it's on the way out.
That's tough to hear. I believe we're going to need to use this in space travel. I don't see another source of energy that contains that much energy.
No, it can be put in. I don't mean it's not used in satellites, and we're not going to have it in our nuclear medicine. I mean nuclear power plants, unless they come up with a new technology that people think is safe and cost effective. I just don't see how they can be built in any in most countries.
I love to do this mental experiment with myself, because we do have a lot of authors on that do ancient history. We're going to have Graham Hancock. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and not to derail this talk, but when you're talking about how close we were to bombing the Russians and the Russians bombing us, if that had happened, would we just go back to the Stone Age?
No. But I think parts of Nebraska would be fine. I'm not quite sure at what point it would be stopped, but I don't think in those accidental situations they would unleash everything. I don't think the giant plan would go into effect, but probably a bunch of major cities would be destroyed.
Okay, because at one point in time in the book you said it was enough. We both had enough weapons to annihilate the entire world 2 or 3 times.
Oh well, it's much bigger than that. It's much more than that. The fantastic comment was Kennedy's science advisor was explaining to people how if we wanted to destroy every continent, we needed 300 atomic bombs. And at the time he said that, the United States had 2,300 atomic bombs. So, and now we have a lot more than that, and we've even gotten rid of some of them. So, no, I don't know. There's a fantastic map of every single nuclear test explosion that was done, and these red dots appear, and as you watch it, the whole world alights in red. So you get to see that from that point of view.
Well, yeah, you bring us back to that Bay of Pigs incident and how close it was. The tension's incredibly high, and even that sub, which I've heard that story in another format, I believe, where there was a Russian nuclear sub around Cuba, and I believe the Navy was dropping dummy depth charges, if I'm correct, and he just chose not to set it off.
Well, it was very, very close, and in fact, what happened was that a huge number of advisors to Kennedy were, especially in the military, were urging him to invade Cuba or launch nuclear strikes against Cuba. And what none of these people knew was that not only the submarine, but various other ships had nuclear-armed torpedoes, and that there already were all these nuclear-armed medium-range missiles in Cuba, which they could have launched against American cities. So thank God that didn't happen. But they were really underinformed, considering we had these spy planes doing this fantastic coverage. They were remarkably underinformed. So it's a little nerve-wracking to think about that we have this technology that can photograph within the resolution of a license plate, but we can't find out that there are 50,000 missiles in Cuba.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. I was just thinking about yesterday we had a reporter that was embedded in Afghanistan, and the talk went into how much there's parts and maybe industries in the U.S. that benefit greatly from the war, and when we had this nuclear Cold War standoff, there was probably a lot of industries on both sides that enjoyed it. Did you feel like that was the case? That there was actually maybe more, we have to beat these Russians, we have to continue to build bombs?
Oh, absolutely. But it's political and it's business, and frankly, it's a giant jobs program. So, every state has some kind of military operation going on, and if they cut it out, they will lose all those jobs. There's a fantastic quote on how every time in the Cold War that the Soviets would pound their shoes and say they were going to kill everyone, the U.S. economically benefited from it because you could use the scare to boost up your home team.
Yes.
And it's a fantastic quote, but I forgot who said it. I can't remember the details.
We'll splice that in. This is,
yeah.
As we're talking, images for the video section will be popping up as well for the,
okay.
The younger kids. They need the constant. And I was watching some video on you. You seem incredibly youthful. Were you using some of the radiation tonic water? I couldn't believe it.
No, it's that I have the personality of an 11-year-old. That's why.
Okay. Well, that's good. I can't imagine just putting 5 years into this. And how many revisions did you do on this book?
Well, one of the really funny publishing stories of this book was that my editor said to me a year before the due date, if you want to turn this in early and get an early response to me, you certainly can do that. Feel free to turn it in early. And I said, I think I'll wait till the book's done, because at that time the book was 2,500 pages long.
Wow.
So if I turned that in, because I never met a tangent I didn't like, so if I turned that in, I probably would have had a canceled contract. And I wonder, if he had told that, if I wasn't on book 7, if I was inexperienced in books, I could have easily turned in that 2,500 page thing.
I mean, it is to think that it was 2,500 pages. Is this your style? It's just continuously moving, just super tight writing style.
So I'm trying to write a book that's about a very sophisticated topic that you can read on a plane.
Yes.
And that's really what I'm trying to do. And it's so funny because I'm getting these rave reviews from physicists. I didn't write the book for a physicist. I wrote it for, people who like history books to read on planes.
Yeah,
anyway.
And the audio book, I have both, is fantastic. Sometimes they'll get a narrator that you might not enjoy, but if anybody out there even listens to the sample of the audiobook, it moves. It's fantastic. I know we have a big audible audience out there.
It's really fun because they sent me the CD version, and I think it's 16 CDs because it's still 700 pages. It's not 2,500 pages. It's almost 700. So it looks like this little Beethoven's complete. Mozart complete symphonies or something on the floor of this giant box.
Yeah, maybe we should start selling that 16 CDs. What is the real origin of bikini? So this term was not used before the actual testing on bikini?
No, not at all. The atoll where the testing was done is called Bikini, and the swimsuit was introduced at the same time, and it used the headline, like the atomic bomb, the bikini is small and dramatic.
I can't believe they embraced the atomic bomb and nuclear the way they did, and now it seems like we wouldn't embrace that. I don't think I could put nuclear water
remember, people thought that at that time, many in the West, and both in Europe and in America, thought the Japanese were evil people. So they thought they were like rodents, and they had this history of horrible war crimes. So we didn't feel sorry for dropping atomic bombs on them at all. And the atomic bombs ended the war, and they were this wild scientific breakthrough that were sort of like magic to people, like the way people today talk about quantum mechanics like it's Hindu scripture or something. They think the uncertainty principle is a psychological issue. But anyway,
crazy,
people then talked about atomic in this sort of magical way. And during their lifetimes, people like Marie Curie and Albert Einstein were practically like priests. They were so highly regarded. They were considered sort of morally advanced people because they knew these secrets of the universe.
Yeah. Albert Einstein didn't work directly on the Manhattan Project, but I remember reading, I'm not sure whose book it was, but they referred to Einstein helping the project from an outside standpoint. Did you come across any of that?
No,
research?
he didn't. He never went to. I didn't make it clear in the book. He went to Santa Fe, I think, to visit somebody, but he never. And he was asked for some issue about something. I forgot the specifics now, but he never actually went to Los Alamos. And he was a real pacifist, which is why he left Germany the first time around. And he called people who made poison gas war criminals, which was upsetting to the German scientific establishment because the head of it had created poison gas. And but the issue with Einstein is that he's the one who got the whole ball rolling because he put his name to this letter composed by a fantastic character named Leo Szilard that went to FDR that got the whole thing going. And both of them wish they hadn't done it in the end.
Well, it was kind of tough. I don't believe the Japanese would have surrendered. Maybe I'm wrong, but you read a lot on just the island hopping and trying to just they don't surrender. So do you think that it was a correct move, or do you think it spun World War III, the Cold War, into action?
Well, we sort of have a new perspective on all of this now, and that is that the Japanese had already lost 60 cities to firebombing campaign, so losing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even though it was a very impressive bomb, didn't really seem to be that big of a change for them. And they already had a situation where they didn't have any shipping, and they live on an island, so they didn't have any shipping bringing anything into the island, so it was going to turn quite grim. And the major reason we now think they decided to surrender was that the Russians entered the war, the Soviets entered the war against Japan, and the Japanese thought that they would act as a independent party to help negotiate a treaty, and they wouldn't have to accept things like the Tokyo war crimes trials, which is what they did with their surrender.
Do you feel that other countries want nuclear weapons? Okay, like Iran, maybe a couple others. They want it for possible, maybe just for energy sources or to make nuclear weapons. Do you think they we should intervene? Do you think we should allow them to have nuclear weapons?
Well, almost every country has signed a non-proliferation treaty created under the Johnson administration. And even though the United States is not doing as good as it should under that treaty in cutting back on its own weapons, almost everyone has forsworn them. And the people who get them are called rogue states, or people who are governments who either didn't sign the treaty or who've gone out and changed their minds. And actually, when you think about it, considering how we thought there was going to be nuclear everywhere, it isn't going on that big. It isn't spreading as fast as people seem to imagine. Mm-hmm. Number one, yes. It's sad that the Kim family has them in North Korea because they seem to be a disturbing group of those Kims. But, the biggest murderers in history were Mao and Stalin, and they both had nuclear weapons, and nothing ever happened with them. So the thing about it is, to me, is that, frankly, we have this myth that nuclear weapons are dramatically different from conventional weapons. And the only way that they're different are the fact that they're really big and they create fallout. And fallout isn't even a good thing to have in a weapon because you don't know which way it's going to blow or what's going to happen with it. You don't know if it's going to blow on the enemy or back on you. So, for example, right now everyone is worried about Iran getting the bomb. Well, because, of course, they think they're going to drop it on Israel. Well, if Iran wanted to destroy Israel, it could just do it already with a whole bunch of planes dropping a whole bunch of bombs. It doesn't have to wait to get the bomb to do that.
That's a really good point.
So that's A. B, what does anyone think is going to happen if Iran drops a bomb on Israel? The entire country of Iran is going to be turned into a fine Islamist dust.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be a response unseen by Hollywood, unimagined by Hollywood between Israel and the United States. So I just don't find these, and everyone who gets one because they got afraid of someone who has one. So, like, India got one, China got one because the United States and Russia had one, and then India got one because China had one, and Pakistan got them because India had them, And so every single one of these things is a reaction, but, the last ones that were used were 1945.
Yeah, there's a radical radio host out there named Dan Carlin, and if you have the opportunity, if he contacts you, I would highly recommend it. Maybe I'll email myself, but he thinks that you should give a lot of countries the nuclear weapon, countries like the Ukraine, because maybe it would stop a Russia, even if they had a threat, or 2 or 3 countries had a nuclear bomb, maybe Bosnia, Ukraine, but who knows? He likes to play
many people feel that Iran is going after them, not because it wants to bomb Israel, but because they think that the United States invaded Iraq because Saddam Hussein did not have nuclear weapons, and that if he had one, we wouldn't have done that. So that's the theory of why Iran wants it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Psychological. So this book, I can't recommend it enough to everybody, not just if you're into the topic, because this wasn't a topic I was going to pick up and grab, but the way you wrote it, the information packed in, the stories, the real human stories, and I read that in almost every review, you really make it feel like this is affecting individuals. So is there anything?
Well, I feel bad when you read these other history books and they treat, Marie Curie like she's this heartless brainiac, and she's sort of like a cartoon. And many times, especially when you write about scientists, they don't try and bring them out as people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that is. Sometimes it's because the heirs think it will hurt their reputation or something, I guess. But most of the time when you read the science books about scientists, they're not treated as human beings. And scientists are hilarious people because they're usually very quirky. I mean, everybody in this book who becomes famous starts off as some nobody in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, Marie Curie made all of her discoveries in a hut that was used to dissect corpses for the community college Cambridge Medical School. I mean, it's fantastic. So, and you just hear all these stories, and when you really see what goes on with these people, it's just so terrific.
That's why it should be implemented into history books, because then you want to grab and keep on reading, find out, it's a great byproduct to learn the information. That's how I look at the book. After you've spent this much time on the book and you see mistakes that were made, are we making any mistakes right now with, and not just radiation, but do you look at any?
Well, I don't think that there's enough going on in R&D for energy, and it seems that this is a continuing problem. And I'm hoping that someone will come up with a new kind of nuclear or a new kind of energy production that will solve the various problems we have now. But it's a real mess, and even beyond global warming, there's a pollution mess. Yes. And everyone was worried about Fukushima contaminating the beaches of the American West Coast, and it's not remotely possible. But what is happening is that Chinese air pollution is contaminating Los Angeles. Yes. And so we really need a new form of energy production, or we're all going to choke to death.
Yes, and we also have to, I feel like China is New York. Well, I'm from Hoboken, so we polluted the Hudson River. At a point, we were just dumping stuff in. Now that we've just transported that to China, and they're making a gigantic mistake, but they are producing goods for more than likely us. Your thoughts?
No, I'm not. I'm just using that as the example. I don't want to blame China. It's that they're going through. It's that they have their billions and billions of people, and they're all becoming, lower middle class. So just that statistic is enough that we need a new form of energy.
No, you're right, because we had a big blowout on this show a couple weeks ago with actually my father, who is I asked him to give an inspirational talk to the younger generation, and it was Father's Day special, and he quickly started going to how Fukushima was going to lead to the end of the world, and that was another motivation I wanted to have you on the show. Because yes, the pollution from China is way worse, and if people are out there smoking cigarettes, they should probably stop smoking cigarettes and before they continue to worry about Fukushima.
Right, that's the actually worst way that you can get. That's the dangerous way that you can get radiation in your life, is smoking.
I completely forgot you have a whole section on that. So the tobacco leaves was it a natural?
Yeah, it's a polonium. They have a polonium in them. I think they still do.
And the polonium is
radioactive, and you smoke it, and it gets in your lungs.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. It is just
the tobacco leaf sucks it out of the ground.
This is and you said if they used an acid wash, I believe it would have.
Yeah, they know that they could use a wash and fix this, but they didn't. And I'm not sure if I think they may still be radioactive, but I'm not sure. I can't remember what date that material comes from.
Everybody's you got to get the book, because I always say, if you don't understand history, you really don't understand anything. You don't understand how many times these cycles have been in play, and the book is it's packed a bunch of fascinating things about history, but so many great stories. And I don't know how to thank you enough. After you spent 5 years, I hope you're really enjoying this ride.
Yes, it's just great. It's really fun, and I'm getting spectacular reviews and getting one of the best books of the year. So it's just thrilling.
Yes. Do you have another book in you after this one?
Yes, but I'm not allowed to talk about it yet.
All right, good, because I can't wait to see a picture of that 2,500-page book before it gets chopped down.
Right, exactly.
So we'll send everybody. Where can they pick this up? They can just go on to Amazon, iTunes, Kindle.
It's at every major bookstore. It's at Barnes & Noble. It's at your local independent bookstore. It's on iTunes. It's on Amazon. It's all over the place.
Fantastic. And we always are proud of our listeners who invest in themselves and realize this is quite a deal. You've spent 5 years. You've cut it down from 2,500 words. 2,500 pages, excuse me, and it's one of the best books I've ever read, I would say.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, it's like a 120-year history. So once you read this, you got that covered. It's a good deal.
You might as well live and learn every day. That's what keeps me happy.
Uh-huh.
So, Craig, I want to let you go. I know you're at the shore. Hopefully you're still at the shore.
Yes, thank God.
That sounds like are you from New Jersey?
No, I live in Greenwich. No, I'm from Texas, so now I live in Greenwich Village. But we go to all over the Northeast.